Mama. Welcome to the Mrs. Mummy PhD podcast. I am your host, Dr. Michelle Gibbs, and this podcast exists to help scholarly mamas like you to achieve your life and academic goals without sacrificing what matters most. Here, we're changing the overwhelm, juggle, struggle narrative around what it means to be a mama on an academic journey to one of empowerment, fulfillment, and purposeful success. So how do we successfully navigate these journeys? Well, first, we need the space to embrace this unique blend. Let's begin by saying yes to creating a life that feels as good on the inside as it looks on the outside, because that's when we truly become purposefully whole. So get ready for the most non-traditional, unconventional, and revolutionary approach to PhD motherhood, because one thing I have learned over my many years of experience on this journey is that if you want something different, you have to do something different. But you must be brave enough to think differently first. So, Mama, are you in? Fabulous! Let's begin. These are our journeys of becoming. Hey Mama, welcome back to the podcast. If this is your first time here, welcome. And I hope you feel totally at home by the end of this episode. And if you are a regular listener, I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for spending time with me each week, listening to the podcast, sharing it, and just making it what it is. So thank you so much for your time and for listening in today. In today's episode, I want to dive into a question that I think every mama who is doing a PhD or has ever done a PhD wrestles with at some point or the other, whether that's consciously or unconsciously. And that is whether scholarly motherhood, whether PhD motherhood is an art or a science. And let me tell you, when I started my PhD, there was no one to tell me that this was not going to be down to a science. I thought, there must be a formula to this, a set of steps I just need to follow, a perfect time management strategy that will help me nail this research thing, parent like a pro, because I already had one son at that point, stay healthy and well, and even have a little free time. I thought this is nothing. And by the way, by the time I'd started my PhD, I'd already had 4 very strong degrees. Like, I did really well. I had 1 bachelor's degree and 3 postgraduate degrees, which I had done really well in. And I thought, what's another degree, a PhD? I can definitely do that. Just need to get it all down to the science and I can just get this thing done. And by the way, all of my degrees actually are in science. So I am a scientist by background. Like, that is my education, has been in science. So all of my degrees has been in science. And I thought, just need to nail this thing. This would be nothing. And let me tell you, I tried the formulas. I tried the color-coded planners, the Pomodoro techniques and timers, the perfect morning routine. And I thought for a while, I could knack this thing. I could definitely do this, right? I can definitely make this work. And then, of course, life happens. And I remember one morning really vividly, I block out this day. I think I'd had like a whole set of papers I needed to read. And my husband had taken our son to school, and I was sitting down with my laptop and I was ready to just make this day happen. And just as I sat down, those phone calls you get from the school where it's like, oh yes, he's been sick, can you come pick him up? And I was like, oh my goodness, like this day is just about to go sideways. And I remember in that moment, no amount of planning, no amount of pre-preparation, no amount of time blocking or color-coded plans could save me. Like, none of that helped in that situation. It was just one of those first moments early on in my PhD that I realized this thing is not a science, not as a mama. This is an art. And bearing in mind, like I said, by the point at which I was early on in my PhD, there is nobody that could have told me that I wasn't going to just nail this thing. I felt so confident. And this confidence started to erode until I realized, you know what, Michelle, this is harder than you think. This is harder. This is going to be harder than you think. There's no set formula. that's going to get you through this. There's no set formula. And just like, I always say, like riding a bike, for example, yeah, you might learn the steps. You need to take that systematic approach at first, but you get to a point where the skill is to a level that helps you to be adaptable, helps you to be able to manage the unknown situations that are going to pop up along the way, because you've mastered that skill. You nail the art of that skill. And that isn't always a reproducible approach. The approach is not always reproducible. It kind of depends on the situation. But once you've gotten to a point where you've nailed the basic skill, you are then able to adapt that. You're then able to adjust and ebb and flow as challenges, as obstacles, as barriers pop up. So let's talk about breaking this whole concept of, is it a science? Is it an art? Let's break it down a little bit. So when we say something is a science, right? By that, I mean it's systematic, it's predictable, there's a formula to it. You can reproduce that by following that formula. Input leads to output. A leads to B. You follow the steps, you get the result. It's that simple. And also, by saying it's a science, it means anyone can follow those steps and they should get that result. So it's not down to the person, it's really down to the formula, down to the system, right? As long as you can get this formula applied, you will get the result that you should get. That's what I mean when I say something's down to a science. And art now is something entirely different. For me, art is intuitive, it's creative, it's responsive. By the way, I have 3 whole children's books all about art and creativity. So if you're into that stuff and you've got children between the age of 4 to 8, please do check out my children's books. They're called Doodle Dozen. So when I talk about art as a scientist, I am not saying this as someone who doesn't have an appreciation for, creativity, innovation, and just intuition. I am saying this as a person who has tremendous appreciation for this. And I think when I say something is down to an art, I mean it's intuitive, responsive, adaptable. It's about adapting to what's presented in front of you, not forcing it to match a blueprint. So when I talk about PhD motherhood as being an art, that's what I'm talking about. There's no set way. It is so individual and it is such a unique journey, going on this journey as a mama, that we cannot force it to match this reproducible formula or this blueprint. And, without flexibility, it just doesn't work. And so why is PhD motherhood an art? I think it's an art for these 4 reasons. So the first is that every day requires creative problem solving. So remember I just shared about that sick day. That was not a one-off. There were so many days like that from our first son, our second son, our third son. By the way, all of this is during my PhD, where those perfect plans were just no match for the unpredictability of motherhood. And remember, what you are trying to do, you're trying to fit something that you think should be reproducible and there's a plan and there's steps to take and to follow. And surely if you follow these steps, you should be able to get to the end of this PhD process. But you're combining that with an equally hard journey that is unpredictable. Motherhood is unpredictable. It's not always a crisis. Sometimes it may just be that your little one just needs extra cuddle, just needs your time and attention. Or maybe there's your spouse is traveling, you've got to look after the kids on your own. Or maybe it's your body saying, hey, actually, we're not going to be doing those 12-hour writing sprints anymore, even if it's a research day today. Like sometimes your body just says, no, I can't do it. And for me, success in those moments isn't about sticking to a plan. It's about creatively asking, what can I manage with the energy, the time, the capacity that I actually have today? What can I manage with that? That is what I mean by requiring those creative problem solving skills. That's art. That's art. There is no formula for this. If you came to this podcast thinking I am going to give you the 5 steps to, or the 5 secrets to, yeah, I can share those things. And I do share those things on this podcast. But remember that context is everything. Context is everything. And this journey is so unique. It's about really developing those problem solving skills as a mom, as a scholarly mama, to be able to adapt to the situation as it arises. So every day requires creative problem solving. The second reason I think it's an art, not science, is because no formula works for every family or every season. When my kids were toddlers, my strategy was very much the early morning. I'm a morning person as well, so that worked really well for me. I'd wake up before everyone else, get a few, quiet hours, sacred hours of writing done. And for that season, it worked. It worked. At the time when our sons were taking naps during the day, if I had a free day, to work just on my PhD, I could plan that around nap times and it worked, But fast forward, they got older, the naps disappeared, they would wake up early. So suddenly mornings were a lot more chaotic. Breakfast was a whole set of negotiations. Somebody's lost their shoes, someone can't find their socks. We've got emotional meltdowns, we've got potty training, drama. It's all happening, right? And those beautiful morning writing sessions, they just evaporated. And I had to shift from being able to work in those early mornings, sometimes to working in the evenings, especially after a long day of work, then to sit down and do some writing, or to go to bed early and wake up even earlier than I would normally have to. And guess what? I hated it. I hated it because I was a morning person. I didn't want to work at night. It didn't fit in well with what I wanted to do. And I just had to adjust. I just had to be flexible with my routine and what worked for me. And eventually, I didn't hate it. Eventually, I got into that routine, and eventually that too began to work. Because here's the thing about art. You adjust. And I remember having this conversation with our son. One of our sons is really into drawing and coloring, which is the inspiration behind Doodle Dozen. And I remember he had this really beautiful piece of artwork that he was doing for school. And there was a little corner of this beautiful fish that he was drawing. It was gorgeous. It was beautiful. He had all these different shades of blues and yellows, and it was just beautiful. And there was a little corner of the drawing that had a little smudge, and he was so upset about it. He was so upset about this little smudge because it's like, oh no, it's ruined it. And I said, well, this is art. This is art. It hasn't ruined it. It's made it unique, right? The smudge, it just makes it unique. It blends in. You can actually, smoothen that out, and it just looks like part of the plan for the drawing. You adjust, you adapt, you ebb and you flow through this journey, and there's no set formula that works in every situation. You experiment, you learn to, go with the flow. You learn to paint with whatever colors the day presents you with. You just learn to go with the flow. And so for me, that's another reason why PhD Motherhood is not a science. It is an art, and that's coming from a scientist. The third reason that I believe PhD motherhood is an art and not a science is because things like intuition and flexibility, they're really essential tools to have in your toolbox. There were so many days where the logical, productive choice was to just push through, write that next section, regardless of how you're feeling, revise that draft, answer the emails, call the patient, do the thing that you need to do. And then your body is saying, you can't do this today. And maybe what I actually needed on those types of days, in those moments, was to just lie on the floor for a few minutes, to just play with the boys for a few minutes, or just take a walk and get some fresh air, or just have a nap, take a rest. And here's a wild part. Every time I honor that inner voice, every single time and I actually listened to it every single time, I would come back stronger, refreshed. The writing was better. The thinking was sharper. I was better at what I needed to do. So that's not science, right? Because that's shifting from the plan. But that's why it's not a science. And that's why it's an art. It's trusting the art of knowing yourself, knowing your capacity, knowing your family, knowing what you need, going based on that intuition that's telling you actually just rest for a little while. You can come back to this. When you come back to this, rested, rejuvenated, revived, refilled, refueled, you'll do a better job. And so just listening to that was really key for me, and just believing that when I come back to this, I'm going to be better, and actually being better. And so the fourth reason why I believe that PhD motherhood is an art and not a science is because I think it forces you to redefine success in very creative ways. So I used to think that a productive day was, for example, writing 1,000 words on my thesis, or responding to my supervisor's comments on something that I've submitted, or meal prepping, or having a tidy house. Like, these were the things that felt like, yeah, that's productive. If I can manage to achieve these things, I've done well. Really externally measuring that success. And then I had so many moments where the only thing I managed to write was like part of a paragraph, or maybe one full paragraph. But even on days like that, like, I would end the day by sitting and reading to the kids, reading a bedtime story and having our devotion, and, reflect on my quote unquote productivity for the day, and still feel gratitude. Because I look back at that day and say to myself, Michelle, this is enough. You managed to get through this day. All hell has broken loose. You've managed to get through it. You're here. You're with your kids. You're with your family. You're happy. And that's enough. And some days the masterpiece is that brilliant academic insight. Great. You'll have some of those. But then other days, the masterpiece is just keeping everyone alive, fed, clothed, loved. And both of those days are valid. Both are art. And I've had to come a long way to accept that, because I think it's really hard when you're so used to measuring and defining success in a certain way. To challenge that, to reverse that, to flip that on its head feels really uncomfortable. But the more I do it, the more I flex that muscle, the more I realize that actually I get to define success. And just because I haven't measured up to somebody else's external definition of success doesn't mean I'm not successful. And it certainly doesn't mean that I am not capable of achieving my goals and achieving the success that I desire, the type of success that I desire, which is purposeful success. It doesn't mean that I can't achieve that. A couple of weeks ago, I had so many plans. I had so much going on with work. I am writing a paper at the moment. There's just so many things happening. And on top of all of that, we had a lovely day out in London, and we came home and our fridge was completely gone. The temperature inside the fridge felt like it was warmer than the temperature outside of the fridge. It was horrible. Horrible, horrible, horrible. And definitely not the kind of greeting I wanted coming home from a wonderful day out. And of course, we had work the next day, and it was the whole week ahead, and packed lunches and all that stuff to do. And obviously we had to throw all the food. Like, we had to discard everything from the fridge. And it was such a nightmare, honestly, trying to sort that out, trying to get a new one ordered. And, of course, when you're not in the market for something, then you've got to browse and decide what type of new fridge do we want. And then it's trying to organize the delivery of that around work. And oh my goodness, it was a complete mess. And on top of that, a friend of mine, her mum had suddenly passed away, and I needed to make sure that I was there for her to offer my support as a friend. And yeah, there was so many things happening as well. Too many things to mention, but it was all culminating in this 1 week. And I think in those moments is when you really realize what matters most. And even though things were not going to plan, I still had life. I still had my family. I still had the things that mattered, even though it felt like things were falling apart. It just kind of puts things in perspective. So being able to creatively redefine success, I think, is so important. And that's why I say it's an art and not a science. So if you believe that PhD motherhood is a science, then every time the formula breaks, you're going to feel like you're the one that's broken, like you're the one who's not competent, like you are the problem. But if you see it as an art, then every curveball, every messy day, every pivot becomes part of the process, right? It's not about expecting perfection. You kind of let go of that and you start getting curious. You can start getting curious because you recognize that your toolbox has things like flexibility and creativity that could be really useful in getting you on track towards your goals. And that's how you finish your PhD well. That's how you finish it without burning out, without sacrificing your well-being or your family life. It's about recognizing that this is an art and not a science. There's no reproducible formula that's going to work for every single mama who's doing a PhD. Yes, it depends on your individual journey and circumstances, but it also depends on your mindset and your perspective and the approach that you take towards navigating your PhD motherhood journey. Because if you want to finish well without burning out or without sacrificing the things that matter to you, you have to recognize that this is an art. This is an art. This is like a dance where you are, that your partner is moving in one direction and you're able to ebb and flow along with that partner. So again, it's an art, not a science. So here's my invitation to you. I want you to think back on your week. What was one thing that made you realize that this PhD motherhood journey is an art and not a science? Maybe you had to adapt your work day. Maybe you had to choose rest over productivity, or maybe you celebrated a tiny win that in the grand scheme of things doesn't feel like a big success, but it's something that you can celebrate, that you've achieved. It reminds you that you're making progress and taking one step forward in the direction of your goals. So let's honor that. Let's acknowledge that that's the work. That is the work, right? That is the art of this. And so if this episode resonated with you, I'd love for you to hit subscribe on your favorite podcast app so that you don't miss the next episode. I've got so much more encouragement, insight, real talk, and practical tips coming your way. Because mama, you do not have to do this alone. I am here to help you figure it out as well. So thank you so much for listening. I'll catch you in the next episode. But until then, mama, I'm sending you lots of love and lots of gratitude. Take care. Bye for now. Thank you for tuning in to the Mrs. Mummy PhD podcast. I hope you've enjoyed the episode. And if you did and you want in on this movement, please head over to mrsmummyphd.com or scholarlymamas.com. If you want to do your PhD well without sacrificing yourself or those you love dearest, then you need your hands on all the ways that we can work together to transform your journey of scholarly motherhood from one of overwhelm, disillusionment and burnout to one of scholarly joy and purposeful success. Make sure you head over to mrsmummyphd.com. I'll leave a link in the show notes. I cannot wait to work with you. Remember, mama, these are our journeys of becoming.